There was always that string, there was always some reality.
The family left San Francisco in the summer of 1967 and began an odyssey up and down the California coast. Moving from place to place was one way Manson kept his followers entertained enough to stay. They started spending more and more time in the Los Angeles area. There, Manson hoped to make a name for himself in rock and roll.
I think he felt that once he got down there, things were going to be very, very different. He had contacts with the Beach Boys.
It was through the women that Manson made his connection with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. In Los Angeles, Wilson picked up 2 of the family women hitchhiking and took them home. Soon, Manson and the rest of the family showed up and moved in with Wilson for several months. Then, through Wilson, Manson did some recording, but nothing came of the sessions. Manson was always bitter that his music would remain unheard.
They came to the ranch, lady. I didn't go to them, they came to me. You're stealing my music every day. You're writing my songs, you're playing my game.
In August of 1968, longtime family member Susan Atkins found the family a new home, an old Western movie set and now writing stable owned by an 80-year-old half-blind man named George Spahn. Leslie Van Houten joined the family in the summer of 1968.
You know, all very fun in the beginning, innocent.
At first, the family reveled in the crumbling movie set and the beautiful countryside around it. They play-acted roles they might have taken in old movies. It was like summer camp, and Charles Manson was head counselor.
It was a great place, actually. We could make anything we wanted out of it. It was like having the Our Gang set, you know. You could turn it into anything.
The whole idea was to let time disappear. There was no time. We were all living now. Now was the only time.
See, at first the magical mystery tour was that we would be cowboys or gypsies or pirates, and every day it was to wear a different role so that we would get more out of ourselves, and every day was Halloween.
Losing oneself, killing old egos, and replacing them with Manson and his very particular view of the world. It was the serious goal of all that play acting that Manson directed.
If you wipe away somebody's identity, say society is corrupt, forget about everything you ever learned, but then you substitute your own philosophy, it's like wiping the blackboard clean and then introducing your philosophy, and then you become the absolute leader.
Bit by bit, the family became one with Manson.
One of his things was to stop you during the day, and he'd put your palms up to his, and then he'd move them in any direction that he could. Or he'd make a series of faces, and then you were supposed to try to keep up with them. And the whole thing was always geared toward just complete mirroring of him.
One powerful way that Manson maintained control was through drugs, particularly LSD.
Well, we took hundreds of trips together.
The acid trips were exercises in total control.
With Charlie, he actually did almost like drug programming. I mean, he was the focal point at all times. And what seems so amazing is that he somehow, because acid is a very powerful drug, and it's like I would feel like totally out of control, and yet I would watch him and he would seem totally in control. One of the things, when I look back, I realized I didn't always see him take acid. I don't think he did. The idea was to get rid of all the conditioning, to die in yourself. So he would hold you up and say something to you. Say, see, I can see your mother on you. It's still the conditioning. You know, you haven't gotten rid of it. You're not dead yet.
Sometimes he would reenact the crucifixion when we were on LSD. And it was very realistic. I would die for you. And then the questions would begin, would you die for me?
And what was the philosophy that Manson was offering? It had begun with the notion of oneness and the power of love, but over time, it grew steadily more paranoid. The messages to the family grew steadily darker. There was no right or wrong, and life and death were really the same thing. In fact, death could be a welcome step on the way to a better world. And in the fall and winter of 1968, as Manson saw himself more and more a lone visionary, He and the family spent more and more time in a place that only increased their sense of isolation, a remote outpost in Death Valley, Barker Ranch.
We really weren't in touch. We were allowed to listen to the Beatles and the Moody Blues and Manson's music.
Nonetheless, Manson was aware of what was going on in the nation's cities. Since 1966, city after city had seen rioting in black neighborhoods. The cry for black power was being heard alongside the ever stronger actions against the war in Vietnam.
We're gonna make Vietnam look like a holiday. Because if America don't come round, America should be burnt down.
The family moved back to Los Angeles in January of 1969. Then the paranoia ratcheted up even more in early July, when Manson thought he'd killed a black drug dealer he also thought was a Black Panther. Now convinced that the full fury of the Panthers was soon to descend on the family, bitter about his failure to record his music, and most importantly, certain that a giant race war was impending, Charles Manson spent July and early August tense, paranoid, and angry. On the night of August 9th, 1969, at a house on Cielo Drive in Los Angeles, the actress Sharon Tate, wife of movie director Roman Polanski and 8 months pregnant, was at home with her friends, the hairstylist Jay Sebring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and Roman's friend Wojtek Frykowski. A young man named Stephen Parent was also on the site, visiting the home's caretaker. That night's murders began with some preparations at Spawn Ranch.
I was with the children. We were in a trailer. I was with someone else, and we were in a trailer. And Charlie came and woke me up. And he said, "Get up. I want you to go somewhere." He said, "Get in the car." And I was in the car with Tex and Linda Kasabian and Susan Atkins. And he said, "Do everything that Tex says." And we were off.
Tex Watson went onto the property first. When he came upon Stephen Parent in his car, he shot him 4 times.
We heard gunshots. He came back and told us to come with him. And we followed. Trying to get into the house, he eventually, I think he went through a window or something, returned to a front door and allowed the rest of us to enter. There was a man that he was dealing with, and I think that was Jay Sebring, I believe. He had him on the floor or something, and he was going to tie him up. And he asked Susan to check the back rooms. And what began to happen is a scuffle started taking place between Tex and the man and Jay Sebring, and he shot him, and everyone else at that point obviously was getting really frightened and scared. And what eventually took place is that there was an attempt to tie everyone up, and when there was an attempt to tie everyone up, eventually Abigail Folger started to get herself undone, and she took off. I ran after her with an upraised knife, and we went out through a back door out onto the lawn. And I started stabbing her. I ran her down, and I began to stab her. I remember her saying, "I'm already dead."
It was Tex Watson who delivered most of the fatal blows at the house that night.
We were so locked in, it's just okay, this must be this, and when you just become more in more like a robot, somehow this must bring it.
The scene left behind was grotesque. There was blood everywhere. A rope tied twice around Sharon Tate's neck was looped over a beam and tied around Jay Sebring's neck. Abigail Folger and Wojtek Frykowski lay on the front lawn. Stephen Parent lay dead in his car. And on the front door, in Sharon Tate's blood, was the word pig. Besides being shot and bludgeoned, the victims had been stabbed a total of 102 times.
when I got back to the ranch, we got out of the car, Charlie came up and asked everybody how it went. But that was the first time I looked at him and I said, Charlie, they were so young. And he just said, go with Tex.
The next night, another attack. This time, it was at the home of grocery company executive Lino LaBianca and his wife Rosemary in a very different section of Los Angeles. Manson knew the house because he'd attended a party at a neighboring home in the past. Along this second night would be Leslie Van Houten, anxious to prove her loyalty to Manson.
I knew that people would die. I knew that there would be killing.
Manson, Van Houten, Krenwinkel, Watson, Atkins, and Linda Kasabian drove around for a while before they stopped at the LaBianca house. Manson went inside, tied up the LaBiancas, and then left.
Pat had a knife, and I tried to hold Mrs. LaBianca down, and I couldn't do it. And Pat went to stab her, and she couldn't do it.
Leslie was still trying to hold her because she was struggling, and I went and got Tex.
And Tex went into the bedroom, and I stood in the hallway, and I looked into an empty room in the den, and I just stayed there, and I didn't move. And I have no sound memory of Mrs. LaBianca dying. All I remember is staring into that room. And then Tex turned me around and handed me the knife, and he said, do something. Because Manson had told him to make sure that all of us got our hands dirty. And I stabbed Mrs. LaBianca in the lower back about 16 times.
The scene at the LaBiancas was no less macabre than that at the Tate House. A carving fork protruded from Lino LaBianca's stomach, a knife protruded from his throat, and the word war was carved in his flesh. Mrs. LaBianca was in the bedroom, her head covered by a pillowcase with a lamp cord tied around her neck. And on the walls, written in their blood, were the words, death to pigs, and rise, and on the refrigerator door, the words, Helter Skelter.
I said, if you're going to do something, leave something with you. Just like I would tell you, if you're going to do something, do it well, and leave something with you. Leave a sign to let the world know that you were there. Have a good day.
The two victims had been stabbed a total of 67 times. Meanwhile, the news of the first night's murders had hit L.A. like an earthquake.
There was a terrible fear, a terrible trepidation on the part of the Hollywood community that this killing, this ritualistic killing, had something to do with celebrityism. And so a lot of the high-profile Hollywood stars, apparently Sinatra left town. Tony Bennett was living at the Beverly Hills Hotel in one of the bungalows. He moved inside to be safe. Steve McQueen supposedly drove around with a gun in the front seat of a car now, all reacting to the Sharon Tate killings.
It was amazing. Everyone's got a piece of the story. Wherever you went, there was somebody say, did you know that they found that thing? And that, you know.
It seemed everyone wanted a gun. 200 guns were sold by one Beverly Hills store in 2 days. It took 2 weeks to get a locksmith. Police were interviewing many celebrities, and some became more careful about their habits. One local in the film business said, toilets are flushing all over Beverly Hills. The entire Los Angeles sewer system is stoned. Now the rumors started to fly.
The first rumor that hit, as far as the crimes were concerned, was that it was drug-related. It was a drug hit. And on top of that, it was Roman Polanski's wife. People knew about Polanski's film, Knife in the Water, all of these strange, dark, mystical movies involving drugs and sex and killings.
Sharon not only didn't use drugs.
In the beginning, you know, there were those who thought Roman had an involvement in this.
It was conjecture Polanski quickly denied.